to Voces Mysticae,
Welcome,
the gateway
welcome.
where the mystical and the mundane meet in a symphony of wisdom. I am your master of ceremonies, Frater O.D., joining forces with the complex and ever enigmatic Vncl RS, where we'll be your guides through the shadowy paths of magic and mystery. Each week, we bring to the fore the hidden knowledge that has shaped the mystical world, from forgotten rituals to the silent whispers of the occult. Join us as we explore the depths of mysticism, sharing insights gleaned from the corners of the unknown. Prepare to have your reality questioned and your perception challenged? I should probably rewrite that. But anyways, in this episode, guys, we're going to embark on a journey through the labyrinthine corridors of perception and existence itself. We're going to be talking about symbols, simulations, and the search for truth or reality. So we're going to traverse the enigmatic realms where simulation theory intersects with semiotics and unravel the intricate web of symbols that shape our very comprehension of what reality is. And we're going to delve into the concept of reality as perceived by magical practitioners, not necessarily the materialistic view that we all live under, the subset there. So we're going to explore how symbols serve as the building blocks of meaning that veil our understanding. Prepare to transcend the ordinary and venture into the mystical and profound dimensions of thought, questioning the very fabric of your existence. So, Unc, you brought this topic up to me. So give me some background on where you got it from, what you were listening to, and how we can kind of breach this topic.
Well, I was listening to another podcast, Lux Occult podcast, and they were talking about, they had a group of them on there talking about simulation theory. It got me to thinking a little bit about if it is a simulation, then it's got to be running on hardware, and hardware is always going to have some limitation to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Use that hardware as a brain or thought process or a mechanism we can't even perceive of. It's got to have some limitation because it's going to be separate from something operating that simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this thing called Nick Bostrom simulation argument.
Mm-hmm.
Three things. One of three things has to be true. Advanced civilizations go extinct before reaching a post-human stage where they do this. So they create a simulation. Advanced civilizations choose not to run ancestor simulations. So we're not looking at the whole picture, right? Or we are most certainly living in a computer simulation. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. But one of those three things has to be true according to Nick Bostrom. And so then we get down to, well, we're magicians. We change reality. Now, I'm not saying that we necessarily make something happen, but we change. I can find no argument against us changing the odds of something happening.
Right.
So I believe my personal belief is we shift the odds of finding the $5 bill on the ground.
Right.
Towards more probable outcomes, towards usually our benefits. And if you're not doing that, why are you calling? You're going to be uncomfortable as you try and gain your escalation to a higher state. Why would you want to be uncomfortable and do that? That's silliness. But in the simulation, when we look at that, we also have, just like when we're playing a game, we have player characters and non-player characters. And I thought, well, and you can't disagree that there are people out there that really seem like that's all they are. Support characters to your life. The person at the register at the grocery store who's just so zombied out from working 2 jobs, going home to the family, doing all that, and then, you encounter them. Well, what makes them an NPC? And also, are you an NPC to other people? Do they perceive you as an NPC?
Right.
And that's another thing that I thought about. What if I was an NPC and all of a sudden I gained enough access, or there was enough background filled in for me, or foreground filled in for me, where I could become a player character, and therefore manipulate and be aware of my environment to manipulate. Because how many people do we see, even on our individual Discord servers, that are just victims of life? They are victims of life, and they don't want to be anything but a victim of life. So how do you help that person become a player character in their own game? Because most of us agree that we are all individual processes, but we are also connected at some level.
Mm-hmm.
And even, I forget the name of the guy that created the Lucifer principle, but he was a staunch atheist, didn't believe in any mystical stuff at all, but he said, our genetic code is designed to transfer information to the next generation or to the next creature that's ready to receive it. So that's a purely scientific basis for what I'm talking about, transferring that data. And that's where I kind of got with that. And I gave you a list of things that I was thinking at the time. And so I think we're going to talk about those later. But that's where I'm at on the Chaos Magician side of this altogether. What if it is simulation? Why don't we play with it? And how do we play with it? There's several ways we can go about it, in my opinion. We can overload the system, which is going to cause gaps and things. We can bring other people to PC status with us, and hopefully in a humble way like me, because, I'm the most humble person you know.
Exactly.
And another thing that we can do is just learn the code and just manipulate it directly, which I think is what we do when we practice our various forms of what we call magic.
Right. And it all comes down to, and you're talking, and there's a lot to unpack within this concept, and a lot to unpack with what you were talking about there, the individual pieces. And I think if we go through them piece by piece, we might be able to parse out some of the practical elements, right? We're operating in a different world than somebody who has fully accepted the materialist paradigm, right? There's reality is what we're talking about. Reality is a common ground. It's what we've all agreed upon. And it goes back to language and what we're communicating with each other.
Yes.
So if I come up to you and I say, yo, Unc, this table, you either agree with me, this table, or no table.
Well,
that's how we start.
Not table.
Okay, now, right? And now we have a disagreement, and now we don't understand, like, does table mean where I'm going to eat food, or does table mean desk where I'm going to do work? So there's nuance there, right?
For some people, it's the same thing.
For some people, it is the same thing. And so we have different realities, little pockets of reality within a commonly agreed reality.
Right.
Now, as magical practitioners, as magicians, witches, sorcerers, whatever label you choose, and we talked about labels in the last episode, and it does dovetail nicely into what we're talking about today. If we don't have a common language, a common code, then the simulation starts to break down. You can't have various programs, right? If we're all programs, or if we're not programs, maybe just stick to the worldview. If my worldview is so starkly different than yours, then we're going to have a conflict in that code. The programs aren't going to run together. And this is something that's happening not just in a magical paradigm. I think we're actually, as a magical paradigm, much safer than your average Joe who is walking around in the mundane materialist world right now. That worldview is coming apart at the seams. Nobody can agree on anything, and thus we can't have logical discourse.
You can't even agree on what's generally right and wrong.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's a moral stance, right? That's a moral stance that comes from tradition. And if we have the unraveling of tradition, which we've had for the past 2,000 years, then reality itself starts to fall apart. We can't agree on anything, then we can't have a common ground to come and communicate with. At the root of that, if communication is what's building the reality, right, or the simulation, that's our code, and we can't speak to each other, we've got a Tower of Babel moment. And I think that's where we're at right now as a society in general. And as magical practitioners working within society, living within society, effectively trying to change our odds in a particular aspect of our own life, we're operating with a stacked deck versus the average Joe. And that goes to us talking a little bit about the idea of a victim versus a player character, right?
Right.
You're walking through a video game. You're the player character. There's always some side character, NPC character, who needs your help doing something. They're stuck in one place, right? You're walking through an Elder Scrolls game and you come across a farmer who's lost his cows or something like that. And they're like, please help me, player character. They can't move, right? They're paralyzed. They're paralyzed by what they've accepted about reality. And that's no different than what we're dealing with here. And this, we're not immune to it by any means. All of us are operating under the hero's journey. Now, some of us have taken the role to be a little bit different than the average person. Right? The hero is what we all kind of want to be. It's the first stages of, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to change things. But in those first few stages of the hero's journey, the hero either decides to go on the journey or decides it's hopeless, right?
Right.
Most people don't want to take up that hero's journey because there's risk involved. I have to leave behind everything that I know. There's a complete and unknown world beyond what I've ever been to before. Think about your Bilbo, your Luke Skywalker, the classic tales. They have to step beyond anything they've ever known and enter into this completely terrifying experience. And they have to change who they think they are. Right? Most people are not up to that game. I think if you've entered into the occult, if you've entered into magic, if you've entered into any of these little pockets of a magical paradigm, you've already taken those first few steps. But along that journey, there's plenty of ways for you to veer off the path and stop or not complete the mission. But if we're relating this to the simulation idea, if I'm the player character, I'm the main character, I've taken on a certain role. To somebody else who may also already be awakened, I could play the mentor role. Shit, I could play the villain role if I want to. Although most of the time, people are playing the villain role for themselves, more often than not. So, there's plenty of roles for us to play. And you brought up a good point about how many people have accepted the victim role. It's comfortable. We know that place. We can assign labels to that place. Suffering becomes comfort after a certain point. We get used to it, and it is very difficult to break away from the suffering that we know to potentially experience suffering we don't know.
Right. Which fuel? That's the thing. It's fuel, just like progressing through your life is fuel. Mm-hmm. It's going to give you fuel. You'll survive on it.
And another part that I think is difficult for people to experience is the fact that in your story, you're the hero, if you so choose to be. But in everybody else's story, you're an extra, for the most part. In a couple of other people's story, in their little pocket of reality, you might be a sidekick. You might be a mentor. You might be an antagonist. You might be just a part of the game experience for them. But to them, you are not the hero. And so whatever your mission is, they're not interested, more often than not. Most of the time, human beings, because of the space that we occupy, we are, I say occupate, I'm making up words on the spot. The space that we occupy within the confines of this this self container that we have, we're so far up our own ass that it's very difficult for us to even pay attention to what other people are doing, but we make up stories about how that person is working against me. Mm-hmm. We do that all the time, and that is a major part of the mentality of a victim. Now, I also don't like to like the label of victim has been so overused, and it's almost pejorative. Like it's like you're a victim. Eh. I don't tend to like to use it that way, but I will point out if somebody's acting from that mindset, right? I'll be like, "Are you sure that that's the case?" Yeah, I'm really sure that this person is working against me. Okay, well, what evidence do you have for that? You really need to step back and take yourself out of the emotive for a moment and try and be really practical, pragmatic about it. What are the chances that Billy Joe over there is really interested in what I'm doing at all? I'm betting you dollars to donuts, Billy Joe's thinking about himself, not thinking about you whatsoever. He's got his own hero's journey he's on. He's not interested in yours unless they come into massive conflict.
I'm a pretty firm
and that
believer
can happen.
That you can be victimized at any time.
Mm-hmm.
But you choose to remain a victim. And a lot of people are highly offended by that thought process. But you know, it's all part of Rule 0. You do you. You're responsible for your life. If you choose to remain a victim, not find the way to get out of that status of being a victim, then that's you. That's what you've chosen. And you're off that hero's path now. Until you until you've had enough of it or something else bumped you.
Right.
Now, that's where I'm thinking right now is what happens if I bump that person back into being a PC in the mass MMORPG, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah. But, MMORPG.
There we go. That. In this mass game we're playing, what if we bump them, find a way to bump them out of that status, that place where they've stopped, or at least give them the opportunity to do so if they choose. That's where I'm coming at. Back after that.
I think, and I said this before, I think we're all largely, if we're operating in the magical paradigm, we've realized a couple of key truths, right? Reality is not fixated, right? It's not set in stone. Reality is malleable. It's changeable based on our mindset, based on the rituals we perform, based on the acts that we engage in.
Not just magical rituals either. That's something that I think is important. Those mundane rituals like brushing your teeth makes a big difference when you're dating.
It's true. It's very true. The and that's another piece of this, right? If we are working within the magical paradigm, that should not stop when you exit your temple or ritual space. There is no difference between that space and the space that you engage in, right? When we work a ritual, we don't do it for it to be happening necessarily only in that space and time, right? It's supposed to be taking effect when we go out into what we call the mundane. We have this idea of them as separate, right? Polar opposites.
Not me.
No,
that's
it's
one
a
reason
product.
I don't vanish all the time. I don't vanish because I'm always in my magical space. My magical space is inside the skin right here.
Right.
Always in my magical space.
That's a distinction that isn't easily made in a world that is trapped in a dualistic paradigm, right? If you are thinking about everything in those polarities, this or that, and if you look around at the world, the way people communicate, the way that they behave, everything is an and, or it's an or situation, not an and, right? We're not unitive, we're divisive. We're operating from a, if it's this, then it can't be this, right? And that, to a certain extent, that helps us when we're trying to communicate, right? We have to have some sort of logical process. The law of identity and logic says, if it's this, you and I both agree that it's table, right? Then it's table and we can move on. But if we're having a disagreement about that based on these like massively different and kind of expanding poles where these ideas or identities are becoming so stretched out in between the two, then it becomes very difficult for us to even operate in a simulation. We can't hack the code. We can't speak our way out of it. And in many ways, our ritual becomes ineffective. I think because
when you're on a ship, your first time, and you got to go, right? You got to use the facilities. So you ask some guy where's the bathroom. It's, oh, you'll find the head. You need to go 2 portals, starboard, right? And then you're gonna turn aft and go 3 portals. It'll be right there. What the hell are you talking about? Real life situation. Because I was a Marine and they put me on a ship and I knew the words theoretically. I learned them in basic training, but we don't use them. Right? Part of the fun. You had to relearn the language. And it was it was a really enlightening experience back in my early, well, I was 20 at the time, this 40 some years ago. Wow. Just that language difference right there. And that's the mundane world.
Yep.
And then we start getting into, we see this when we discuss on the servers all the time, the difference between the Eastern philosophy and the Western translation of that, and then Western magic. You see all these different translations which are reaching a lot for the same thing or have a misunderstanding about this word. I go through that all the time. Y'all are talking Greek to me, but it ain't Greek. So I could translate it up Greek. Thank you, Google.
We do live. It's amazing to be living in a simulation that has so many simulations within the simulation for us to simulate what that might be. But I think this is an interesting thing to speak about because we're all inundated with the idea of materialism. We've all been brought up in it. We live in a very pragmatic worldview. It's based on what we can physically accomplish. Everything about our society at this point is not magical. Everything's about production of units. Everything in nature, every person has been reduced to how much can you produce? What are you producing? That's the meaning that is driving the beast, the system that we've created, right? That's a simulation in itself. Those are the ideas that we've accepted, and we're born into it, we're taught it. And then if we're lucky enough, we have the moment, and this is where the simulation, I think, goes back to like Plato's allegory of the cave. You can see this in antiquity. The idea that some of us are still in chairs, chained to a chair, looking at shadows being projected on the wall by somebody behind us, right? There's a lot of intriguing ideas to unpack in Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Which ones of us are chained to the chairs? Which ones of us are displaying the shadows? And which one of us have exited the cave? And then which ones of us have exited the cave and chose to come back to liberate our fellows?
Or just live in comfort that we know.
Some people exit the cave and they never come back. I'm not interested in saving anybody. But if we map this to what we're talking about, everybody's an individual, but we're all connected. You said we're all individuals, but we're also a part of everything else. As above, so below, as within, so without. There's an unk within me, there's a frater within unk. But you're playing out the process, right? And this is like process philosophy. I forget who it was that came up with that gem. But process philosophy says that all these identities or all these things that we see are just a process, something happening, right?
Right.
We tend to think of ourselves as individual beings, right? We call ourselves human beings. I'm a being. I'm playing a role. And that goes back to my idea of the video game, the reference that you're talking about here. Am I an individual if I'm an NPC? I think so. You're an individuated being apart from me.
You're separate from another thing, unless you're
Mhm.
copied. See, you see
there
that
are some NPCs that look an awful lot like another one.
Yeah, or act like it.
Hello, adventurer.
Yeah.
Can you please help me? Some people, so I want to get to some people we talk to are obvious NPCs.
Yeah.
What, in your mind, makes someone an obvious NPC?
Well, in my wild and roaming travels, I have met many people who are incapable, or apparently incapable, of communicating outside of their box, their little place. Just like in video games, that's all they can do. They can offer you that quest, and until you do that quest, there's no other response. Well, until you agree to it, there's no other thing that they'll do. Then when you agree to it, you get other resources. And I found this. Okay, so in the military, they lost my orders to come back from Germany.
Okay.
They lost my orders. And I ended up with 4 days to clear housing and everything in Germany. And they said it'll never be done. We need to alter your orders. You'll be here another month. No. And I had to deal with people who were so set in their pattern that there was nothing else they could see. But they didn't want to help me. Even though that was their job, they didn't want to, because everybody that comes to them with an emergency is not fitting into their scope, what they see as their purpose. When their purpose is to get soldiers out of Germany. That was their purpose at that depth. They looked at it as their purpose was to process the paperwork in a certain way. Now, I did learn how to activate them into PC status. And I'm going to give away a big secret. When you're dealing with somebody that's a bureaucrat, somebody that handles paper for a living, sit back, take a deep breath. O.D., I understand you're very busy, and I really understand that this is contrary to what you're used to. I'm going to sit over here on this bench and read my book until you're ready to deal with me. They freak out. Every one of them freaked out. Two of them started sweating. One cried. Because I was not acting right. They didn't know how to deal with this situation. And all of a sudden, they became a human being again. And I got to the front of the line because of that. I cleared Germany in 4 days. Impossible to do. It takes 2 weeks to do it.
So therein lies a piece of it, and it's in how we behave and how we interact, right? If you treat somebody like an NPC, like a doing, right? An NPC is there to do a certain function, right? They're not there to be a part of your story. They're not even really relevant, right? So how we treat, behave, and act with another person, another being, directly dictates how involved in the process that we're requesting of them they're going to be, right? They have to, I think most people are used to the idea of, I'm just here to do this thing. We talk about it all the time. Just colloquially, you hear people speak to each other in their own, not colloquially, in their own vernacular. You ask somebody, so what do you do? Right? That's one of the first questions you ask somebody you're new with. Well, I'm not my job. I'm not the activities that I do. Those are some pieces that may make up some of what I am, but I'm a being, right? First, I expect some form of respect that I have intrinsically within me, that I am a being.
Courtesy,
right?
Yeah, courtesy of accepting you as a real person.
Yeah. If we don't use that, if I don't respect you in that way right out the gates, I have no hope of ever awakening you in any way, shape, or form. So that's a very practical way. There's nothing magical. well, I wouldn't say nothing magical, but there's not a ritual, right? The ritual is in itself treating somebody as another human, saying, hey, you know what? I get it. It's like we're going to the DMV. If you come in like everybody else, hot and like pissed off that you're at the DMV, how do you think the people behind the desk are going to treat you?
Right. It's the same problem. And I never have a problem with DMV. I never have a problem. It's like,
It's like they're there to do their job. Let them do it. The more you get frustrated, the more it feels like, and I've done this too at the DMV, and this kind of gets us into some interesting ideas of time. But when you're really frustrated in those situations, time tends to just
yep.
it just elongates. The more frustrated you are, the more time seems to stand still.
Yep.
And if you get really pissed, you could be sitting there for hours. Versus take a breath, right? That's a very practical thing for us to do as magical practitioners. Take a breath. You're not the only being. You're not the only individual right now. You may be locked into that story mode, and you're like, I really want to get to the main quest, but I got to get this. I got to get this done first. It's funny. We have this idea that we can shift and change things as magical practitioners. We have this idea that the world is malleable, but if we lock in on our narrative, on our singular story, we forget that really quickly. We forget it really quickly. I'm a victim to it as well, where I'm like, I will get frustrated and I'll go, man, this is not going my way. And I'll forget, oh, use the tools that you've learned. Use the tools that you've learned.
It keeps happening. It'll keep happening forever.
We're human, right? That's part of it. So I think it's interesting, this idea of if we wake enough people up, what starts to happen to the simulation? This is something that people have talked about for a long time, but if we wake up enough people, what starts to happen to the reality around us? I remember back in 2020, the evil year of the plague, right? When that started happening, I started seeing within the spiritual community online of large, not even really the occult or magical subset of that, but the very much larger branching of, let's say, new agey material, right? There was so much talk about there's an awakening happen, right? At the time, I was like really jazzed about that. I was thinking, oh, that's a really cool idea to be a part of this time where people are starting to wake up. I think for a minute, the earth gave us pause to say, hey, take a look in the mirror and see what's going on in your own life. I mean, most of us got a timeout for like 2 months. Like Earth put us in a damn timeout. You sit there and you think about what you're doing. You go to your room and you stay there. And for a minute there, it felt like people were kind of awakening to some fragment of what this magical reality is. But as normally happens, those awakenings are short-lived, right? It's like a dream. It happens for a moment, it's glorious, it's wonderful, and then you wake up.
Oh, wait.
Or go back to sleep.
I don't think I'm interested.
So, but if that's the case, right, for this example, if in that time, over those couple of months, a bunch of people did wake up for a minute, is that enough to jolt the simulation itself? We've seen nothing but, as a society, a more chaotic approach to everything. Every facet of what's going on in society right now is more and more chaotic, approaching more and more quick. It's approaching more quickly this chaotic nature than it was even 4 years ago. And I wonder if there was a jolt to the system there, if there was something that started to create bugs in there. Now, most of what I think occurred is people woke up to the idea that what we were programmed with about our reality wasn't working. Wasn't working for any of us. We realized that because we stopped doing the production. We stopped being productive units for a moment and returned to our humanity for a second. And that's a jarring thing to a system that is built on production. It's built on that. And now they got a glimpse of maybe who they thought they could be or who maybe they are. And that created a whole bunch of new little realities that now have to play in that system. You see where I'm going with this? Like,
well,
we jolted the system in some way.
Realities is the good term, but I think perceptions, a whole bunch of new perceptions from your own perspective, from the individual perspective. If you want to call that a reality, I'm cool with that, but I need to define that for myself.
Sure. And I think that's all reality is my perception, right? My reality is going to be different than yours.
Right.
There are certain shared commonalities, right? There's certain things that we can agree upon.
Impacting vehicles at 60 miles an hour apiece is not a good thing.
Not fun.
Thing. Yeah.
Not fun. And most of those things are still holding true for us.
Yes.
But some of the major pillars of the reality that people had agreed to over the last 100 years came out from under the carpet. Like the rug was pulled out from underneath them, right? Nobody trusts the media anymore whatsoever. That was one of the three major pillars, at least of American society.
Right.
That you could trust what the news was telling you, right?
Well, we had time to stop and look at what they were all saying. That was the problem. Instead of just absorbing and saying, oh, cool, now we had time to process it. Bad thing. That's a bad thing for the media.
Right. Government, that's been going away for quite some time. Although people don't necessarily always trust government. But historically, if you look back, people agreed to have it in some shape or form. We've got to have it. And people disagreed about what that form may take, but you got to have it in order for society or civilization to function. That's been decaying for quite some time.
And
the tradition,
unfortunately, the bigger your society, the more complex it has to be to support that society, to do its core function.
Right.
Which means, they're going to have more on to do with your life than they should.
It's
but
true.
I don't want to go back to living in villages and shoveling manure for a living because,
Well, and very few people do. Nobody wants to give up what they've gained, right? We're living in a time where magically, even, I mean, most of the shit, this technomancy that we are all seduced by with AI, the internet, and everything is so amazing. I was just talking with a friend the other day about how the world would fucking just shit its pants if Amazon took away 2-day, 1-day, same day delivery. People would lose their damn mind.
Very rarely do I see that anymore. If I ordered parts for my 3D printer. Took a week. Through Amazon, took a week. I could have had it delivered in 2 days if I wanted to pay for
it. That's convenience, right?
Yeah, it's convenience. Well, Amazon is convenience anyway. I don't, and this is not a social or political thing. I don't like using Amazon because I like mom and pop organization.
Right.
That's my preference. But I give up variety and convenience when I do that. So it's something, and I like doing that when I can. But unfortunately,
it's a trade-off.
Mom and pop doesn't make FEP for my printer.
Yeah.
So
there's more to it here. What is governing our reality, right? We talked about the communication of information that's involved with the media, the structure of the society built mostly by the government, and the other piece of that was religion, right? Religion dictates the moral compass, right, of what your society is going to be. When you have those three pillars, you can't communicate anymore because nobody can agree on what's happening,
right?
Because you don't trust the media. Nobody likes the way that things are being handled as far as the structure of society. Right. And without a seeming understanding of what our morals should be from a religious perspective, then you have the three major pillars that build civilization completely unraveling. And the mode of reality that we had agreed upon was the civilization model. It was under those three things.
Right.
So the simulation starts to break down at that point. If you don't have those three things operating at full capacity, you can maybe survive with two of them, right? Now, religion had been decaying for a long time. I mean, this is a 2,000, maybe longer year span of time that religion had been decaying its importance, especially as we move towards a more scientific, materialist worldview, taking the mystical out of it, right? Then you have just the government, and then you have your communications, your media, right? It existed on those two pillars for quite some time. It was like, okay, we're good with these two pillars. We don't need that third one. We'll just replace it with a fake pillar called atheism of some kind, which is just, and I don't want to get into that necessarily, but it can be a replacement for your religious pillar for a time, but it doesn't dictate.
Agnosticism is what I call it. I'm not going to put enough effort into it to not believe or believe truth. I'm just not going to participate.
Yeah. So you get those three, they get wiped out, and some of them take major hits in the last decade. And you start to see reality, the common agreeance of what is happening around us starts to just unravel. Now you have this person's perception competing with this person's perception competing. You have 9 billion perceptions competing instead of groups of them, right? Even in nation states, you see the cellular grouping of it. Well, we all agree on this thing. And you can have hundreds of those. But what I think might have happened was the simulation started moving towards the whole Western capitalist approach across the entire world. Everybody using the same program. And when that program got a bug, got a flaw in it, what happened? What happened?
Fell apart. So
it fell apart. Where I'm going with this, though, is we're seeing that the simulation or the code that we've been running on, the language that we've been communicating with, has been corrupted in some way. We're at a really interesting intersection as magical practitioners, because throughout history, if you look at it, the magical practitioner, the mystic, is the one who programs that simulation. They come to you from the top of a mountain carrying some stone tablets and say, here's the new program that we're all going to run on. These are the things that we're going to talk about. These are the morals that we're going to, use. This is what we can do. This is what we're not supposed to do. That's what we're going to build this entire simulation on. And we're waiting for that to happen in the modern era. We haven't had that person, that programmer, come into the picture. At least I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing a whole bunch of angry ants fighting each other over scraps of the decay of what civilization was. But as magical practitioners, we can influence that.
It's hard to build a group of people in the physical world and online. You would think it'd be easier, that will take those symbols and agree on them.
Mm-hmm.
Agree on them. It's like they want to resist or make trouble. And there needs to be an agitator in every group. Mm-hmm. That's without it, it stagnates. But I'm really fortunate to have some local friends that we communicate well enough, and we've got rules we've set aside. These are our rules. The moment we pass through this gate, these are our rules. These are what applies to us. And if you don't agree, you're welcome to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no hard feelings. You know? There's no hard feelings with that. And if you have hard feelings, those are yours. Those are yours. You've bought that. And we work really hard because we're multi-practice people as well.
Right.
we've worked really hard to make sure that we answer each other's needs as a village. They actually got one group is working on that. I mean, they haven't got it all down, but one group, my hunting group, our pack is tight. I don't know how else to put it. It's just tight. Bikers have less rules, and they have less functioning rules than we do, and they hurt each other over them. So it's just an amazing thing to have that freedom and flexibility. I had the privilege of working with some of the younger ones this morning. It was just amazing to go there and be at peace. Know that the moment I pass through the gate, there's no cell phone. There's no nothing like that. We have electricity in the barn. That's not a problem. But no air conditioning. Oh God, I wish we had air conditioning. But that gives us a village, and that's only a total of 20 active people, and then family members that come to certain things as well. And that group gives me extreme peace. Whereas out here, I might go to a meeting with other people, other practitioners now and again, but I don't have that peace because they have not come to the agreement that we're going to speak and try and use language and symbols and techniques that we all can agree with. Right? So you get it. You've seen it. Right? You've seen the ritual petitions and how they talk about witchcraft. Some of them, not all of them.
Not all of them.
It's not as bad as it was. The older ones. Oh my God! It's like going down south and talking to an old white guy about people with the pigmentation. It's just like that. It's just utter blind, uneducated hate. It's amazing.
It's prejudice. Yeah.
Yep. And it goes the other way too. We talked about that last time, I think. What makes you a witch?
Uh-oh. You brought a digital device into the container, Unc. Not cool.
We don't have that agreement here.
We do now. I just changed the reality.
If you want to have that agreement, we can talk about that agreement.
Mine's in here too. But it's a great example.
I'm trying to drug my dog. My dog has anxiety issues, so
it's a good example of how that reality shifts and changes, right? And when we speak to each other about reality as it's something that's set in stone, that it doesn't change. People talk about it. No, that's reality, man. Like, you can't change that. Like, people speak to each other like that, and with that kind of assumption behind their words.
Here's an interesting experiment on that. What if we took a week to question everything that we and other people think are set in stone? Why is that reality?
Right. And it goes to questioning versus statements. Right? There's beliefs versus a healthy skepticism, right? Beliefs are what make up what we think are the underpinnings of our worldview, right? I believe that this is a thing, that this is a thing, that is a thing, and this is how they function. And I can explain that to you and hopefully come to some impasse. Now, if you start to do comparative analysis across people's worldview, most people are going to agree on very simple things. And they're going to agree across the board. There are caveats to every single one of them where somebody has to be a pain in the ass about that particular caveat.
Sorry, I don't drink IPA. That's the example right there.
Yeah.
I can't believe you grouped that swill. That's well, yeah. There's things that we need to agree on that, and the simple things are the easiest. The complex things. There's so many things we inherit from our early background and our education, our mid-education, and our adult education. Whether we went to formal school or not, you're getting educated. You are getting programmed by the simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't agree on those terms, those simple terms, we got real problems. And when we don't agree on the bigger complex terms like social things and
Mm-hmm.
political things and religious things, what we're talking about, all of a sudden we've got gears that are grinding.
Mm-hmm.
And if you write a program and it conflicts with another program, you have a crash simulation, or your computer crashes. Sometimes it just crashes the program if it's set up right, right? Sometimes it crashes both programs, and sometimes it lights on fire.
And sometimes it lights on fire. I
Well,
think we're close.
That was actually a real virus attack at one time. They would cycle the hard drive on and off and on and off and on and off until it overheated, and it could burst into flame.
Especially with the lithium-ion battery in there.
Well, that's now. Yeah, we didn't have that then, but yeah.
No, the nickel cads, they don't pop off the same way as the lithium-ion does.
Takes a lot more abuse.
But that's an interesting thing to bring us to kind of start to wrap up what our conversation is here. If you're a magical practitioner, you have to come to terms with your own system, right? You cannot be at war with yourself when you're working in a system,
right?
You can't. If it, and even belief, right? If you have even a half-hearted belief that the ritual, the spell, whatever you're working on isn't going to work, it's not going to. I'm just telling you right now. It's not going. You have to be balls to the wall in on what you're doing for it to have any kind of lasting efficacy. There are some things beyond that challenge that experience, I think. There have been certain things that I've worked on where I definitely had a reservation, and I think we kind of do for the most part. I don't know if I could ever say 100% I'm in full belief, like religious fervor belief. Sometimes I get there, but I don't stay in that state, right?
Right.
I still have to operate in the world, and I'm being programmed from out there, like you talked about. And I have to try and ditch that when I come into magical space, hence banishing, right? I'm banishing the programming from out there so that I can get into the mindset here.
Yes.
And I think that's valid. Then we get into these spaces where if I was halfway in or even 3/4 in and the spell still works and it works really effective, that screams to me that there's something operating that's not me, right? So that has expanded my idea of what reality is. We're talking about spirits, spirit forms, thought forms, all the different things that are unseen. And that's what we're really talking about dealing with within magic is there's an agreement that there are things unseen working here. So the magical community, we have that going for us. There's not very many of us that are like, there's some within the psychological model, perhaps, that don't necessarily agree that there's an unseen force working on this behind the scenes.
I think
is
that's
that unseen
logic on their part? Because, well, from the psychological model, there's things going on in your illicit mind all the time that you don't have and should not have control of.
Mm-hmm.
You're not controlling your heartbeat most of the time,
right?
And most people can't
or your
control
breath.
their heartbeat other than through exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Your blood pressure. You shouldn't be able to control that, but you can. Right? With practice, you can. These are all things that run in the background, just on the physical material level. Mm-hmm. On the thought level, how many of us have intrusive thoughts?
Where do those come from?
That's a perfect example of your illicit mind bubbling up. I don't need that. And we meditate in order to learn to control those. Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the reasons we do it, but we meditate in order to learn to control those illicit patterns in our mind, in our psyche. And to say that those are not the unseen things, and I've heard that argument. You're absolutely right. They argue that to the end of the earth, that everything can be defined.
Yeah,
dude, you don't have enough life this time around. Okay. You don't have enough life to define everything this time around. Just accept that you can't control it and move on, my friend.
Go ahead and define eternity and get back to me.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing. So we're proving in that experience that there's something beyond the simulation,
Right.
something externally acting on the simulation. Maybe some of it's internal within the simulation. Maybe there are different programs that we're a slave to, right? This program has to have this program in order to run all the way up to the top. But there are some forces acting outside of our individual programs, outside of our individual simulation, right? That's a powerful thing to just contemplate. And if you're ever having trouble understanding this idea of everything's a simulation, everything is a set of symbols that can be manipulated, the most powerful practical tool, I think, is to start asking questions.
Yep.
Ask questions instead of statements, right? Don't operate from statements. A statement's like a sword, right? Whereas a question is more like a cup. I'm going to share something with you. A cup is something we can fill, we can both drink from. If I share a sword with you, well, you're probably not liking that. So, like that, I think the questions help us break through some of those programs that might enslave the mental subsets that we're dealing with. Help us to look past the illusion and then realize that we have some agency in the process.
Right.
We have some sovereignty in the process. And that's where the learning of the language itself, the symbols, the signs. And that's when I was looking at some of the things that we could talk about here, the idea of a semiotic cosmology is something that's out there, and that the entirety of reality is nothing but symbols communicating with each other and groupings of different symbols instead of a material thing that is being assigned a symbol to explain it, right? We tend to think of languages as something that we stick a sticker on, right? This symbol right here, this word, I'm sticking a sticker on it so that I can identify it. But what if the physical reality is generated from that particular symbol? It's from the symbol level first, then a symbol being applied to it. Like the table is generated from the word table, or from the thought table.
Yes. Praise Hephaestus. So the creator deities, one thing, I've done a lot of work with creator deities.
Mm-hmm.
Hephaestus in extreme, or Vulcan if you prefer.
Mm.
But the thing about them is there is some theory that they are giving credit to the creation of the world at the behest of other deities, given the task of creating.
Mm-hmm.
And that creative force, tell me what you need. The craftsman asks what you need, right? The craftsman asks what you need. I need a table.
Mm-hmm.
All right. When you say, I need a table, do you mean you need a dining room table, or you need a work table, or you need a side table?
Mm-hmm.
And so the craftsman knows one of the issues we have is you have different types of craftsmen. So you've got a carpenter, right? You've got a carpenter. Carpenter mostly just cuts and puts lumber together. That's their major function, right? You've got wood carvers. They put pretty things on the wood. They also know carpentry to some degree or another. You've got shipwrights. Shipwrights take that lumber and turn it into a device of trade and travel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the craftsman is the one that's going to turn these words into an object from your description of what you need. Whereas somebody might show him, somebody might say, whereas a craftsman might just bake a table and have it for sale. Created the object, the person's going to give that device actual definition. The owner of that is going to give them the actual definition. We bought us what was basically a long side table. It sits behind our couch. We sat behind our couch and had various things on it. So artsy things, flowers, and that sort of thing. And then we got a different couch. That became, instead of a table, it became a TV stand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So then it became a TV stand. So the object is defined by how the owner uses it in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get into the simulation, that's when we start talking about how the simulation speak. How does this PC describe it versus this PC? And how did the craftsman who created it originally, was probably a craftsman who created a factory, but somebody initially designed that. That was a craftsman. And then you had the people who were trained to put that together, who were probably more NPC-like than any of the other people involved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time. Because it doesn't take a lot to screw the leg in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's interesting how we play around with that one concept of the name, creating it. Is it created from the name, or is it created from the function of the owner?
It's both.
Yes.
It's always both. And
Isn't
that's
that
the thing with it is. So, and it helps us get into the magical headspace, right?
Right.
I say I need a wand. Well, okay. I'm stating it right now, stating my intent, my desire to have one, right? Well, now I have to go and put that into effect. The magician isn't someone who just states things, right? The magician also is someone who is the craftsman too. Why do you think so many of the grimoires tell you got to make this yourself? Not necessarily always true. You can use something else, but the intent behind it generates the manifestation of it in reality. In the case of I need a wand, the thought, the word, that generates either the behavior, the motivation to go craft it myself out of the materials relevant or present. But if we reverse ourselves from thinking object first and we start thinking of name and symbol first, then we realize that all of the connections, all of the reality is based on the language and the symbol sets that we agree on. And that is what generates reality, which, if we can agree on, is a group perception of the happenings and events that are occurring at a larger scale, right? And that to me is how I tend to operate. It's the words first, it's the symbols first. You see all the myths generated from sound, generated from symbol, generated from this. All of the myths across the world say it very clearly in the mystical perspective. Everything is generated from the symbol first, the form, right? If it's Platonism, it's the form. It has being before you even define it in the material world. Right. There is it exists before it is generated.
The four realms of creation.
Mm-hmm.
That where we get to?
Well, then that's Kabbalistically, right?
We have the four. We have the plan, we have the crafting, and we have the final product. Each one adding flaws to the original pure idea.
Mm-hmm.
I love breaking that down into elemental patterns. That's
right. It's fire first, then it's air, then it's water, and then it's earth.
Right.
And it operates within that. And the funny thing is in the book that I'm working on, it relates that pattern to our breath, right? Which is in itself life-creating, life-sustaining, all those things. It's the same generation of those elemental patterns in every single breath that we take. Fire, air, water, earth.
We'll
fire,
have to
air,
discuss
water,
about
earth.
My patterns then sometimes, because I use 6.
Oh, well, yeah, you can always add.
Yeah.
If you want a more complex reality.
I needed one. Now, but so as far as the crafting, I work in multiple materials, right? I know craft wands. He sells them online, but
Dude, shameless plug, magic.social.
But you craft wands when you are tasked to craft a wand for someone, you need their purpose and definition, right?
For the most part, yeah. Unless they leave it up to me. Right? And then it becomes a symbiotic. More often than not, if somebody says I need a wand, they've generated the experience, right? Yeah. They've started it. I become the next level of that participation, but there's also a participation from the material itself, right? You're talking about something that's also previously a living being, and I maintain the worldview that it is still, even as
I'm the same one,
as a magical element, right? So I got one here that I'm still working on. Northern red oak here, and each one of these has their own personality, right? They have their own sense of being, and in that process of craftsmanship, it's I don't want to seem cheesy and say like a dance, but there's a partnership going on here between me and the wood itself, and the eventuality of what this thing will become, right? It's not necessarily all me. And I think that's very similar to what the creator deities would too with material. That's a relationship, not necessarily so much a master over material, but a partnership with the material for what it is going to become in that way. So does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah, I think, and as a magical practitioner, we need to have that mindset with everything, right? We tend to, or I see people, and this may be even my judgment, right? We get into the magical paradigm, we get really excited that we can alter the code. And then we start going, look at me with all of my grand powers. But it's a relationship of connection.
And you live in mom's basement and don't have a car.
This is not my basement, dude. This is my garage, and there's 2 cars in it, and I own them, okay?
You and I don't count. We poke fun at those people, and it may not be right of us to do that, but I'm still going to do it anyway. Until they either get mad enough to just hang up or do something. Do the do.
Do the do. It's compassion through a different mode, right? I'm being a jerk compassionately so that you might motivate yourself.
I'm not sweet. I consider myself
compassion
to be kind.
Doesn't always have to be sweet.
I consider myself to be kind in that I'm going to fix your problem if you give it to me, right? I don't have time to waste. If I will hand you tissues and be done with it. That's the end of what I'm going to do.
I mean, ultimately, I think where we're going with this episode in general is that as magical practitioners, the practice that we should have, since this is so, we want this to be less theory and more what can we practically do with it in shaping your worldview like the craftsmen that we are, right? We are the sculptors of our own reality, of our own perception of what is reality, right? There may be a reality that's above all of our perceptions, right? But we shape that perspective like a sculptor with a chisel out of marble, right? We are doing that. And if we ever stop and say we're done, we've made a grave mistake. Nothing about the magical worldview is that rigid, I don't believe. So much of it is always in flux and fluid, just like language. Language is never stuck in one position. It's always flexing, changing to meet the needs of the beings that are wielding it, right? Unless we are in the simulation ourselves, just the symbol, right? That's one of the things in the semiotic cosmology is that we may not even have being. We may just be the image of a symbol, which tracks with some mystical stuff. We're the image of God, we're the image of the universe reflecting in on itself, or vice versa. But if we're pretending at all in this simulation that we have agency to hack the code, to change things, we have to constantly be questioning what our paradigm and worldview is. It's always in flux. And that leads us to really interesting avenues of exploration with the self, with our practice. Like, if it's that fluid, how much can I change? How much can I change within myself? and how much can I change within the world, and what is the world, right? Those big questions start to come in, and that's why I think almost every magical practitioner at their heart is a philosopher, is a lover of wisdom, a lover of trying to understand what this is all about. If you ever stop doing that, you've turned down the wrong road. You should turn back or cut across and get back on the road that you were on.
Well, you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer one or another form of delusion if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to either go meningitis or you're going to quit. You know, I'm sorry, not quit, but you're going to stagnate in delusion.
Well, and that'll often lead to quitting, because then you'll ditch the paradigm for something else, because there's more comfortable paradigms to operate in. Operating in the awakened state of a magical worldview is difficult. It's very hard.
Uncomfortable.
And because largely, and this is one thing that people disagree on quite a bit in the community, I don't think it's for everyone. I really don't. I don't think everybody's up to the task. Not in this life. Maybe if they reincarnate into another one, but not everybody who's alive right now is up to this challenge.
I agree.
And it's not to say that they can't, right? I'm not saying they're not able. I'm saying that they're not up to it.
Well,
otherwise it would be happening.
In general, we agree, you and I agree, that to live a magical life, you must practice will and practice praxis.
Mm-hmm.
How much practice is in your praxis, right? And a lot of people think of magic, this going off on paradigm issues, but a lot of people think of magic as if it's practicing magic as if it's weightlifting. You get stronger and stronger in it. I don't think it works like that. I think you get more focused and more talented at moving probability from one point to another. That's my personal opinion. You get better at it. You get stronger by getting more efficient. That's my thing. You don't get better by hammering away at it, because having met people that do that, eventually the universe is going to smack you hard, because it doesn't like you getting rough with it.
Yeah, it's not a brute force thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes the focus takes that form, right? Sometimes you're in the middle of an incantation that you have to go after. Like, you really have to put your back into it. Like that.
Right.
That happens. But if you are attacking it like you're trying to get swole, yeah, I think you're right. It's more like Aikido. I am receiving what that is. I'm a receptor, and then I'm reflecting and or projecting the energy of that experience, the symbols of that experience, to generate or recode in our paradigm that we're using for this episode, the perceptions that I'm having. And in doing so, if my perception changes, there's a possibility that the perception of other programs around me might change as well. I'm pretty hopeless, I think, to change the perception of everybody else.
Right.
Through my magical praxis. And I tend to not approach it that way. I think that's foolhardy for the most part. That's just my take on it. I think that if you got enough people together, maybe you could. And I think at times in history, people have been aligned to such purpose to do that, or certain people come along that have such incredible focus that they have a charisma, an aura about them that like turns the lights on for people and maybe awakens their NPC. But that's generally not something that they brute force attack either. They're just being who they are. They are so self-realized that people can't help but like be attracted to it, like a moth to a flame.
I worked for a general that was just like that. In fact, if you meet military generals, they're a different breed of people, all of them.
Oh, I'm sure.
By the time you get to the point where you can tell 100 people to go die today without blinking, there's a change that happens in these people, and most of them were gentle and kind to a degree you can't believe. And I've driven a few of them, but I worked for one in particular. You couldn't help but be a better Marine around this person. You couldn't do it. He just encouraged positive behavior. Now, you talk about positive behavior in a military guy, they have different goals. But this general was an amazing human being. Now, did he get me into a lot of trouble? Yes, because he liked watching me get out of trouble.
Well, that helped you.
It helped. He did. He helped me. And how do I put it? He changed people around him on a regular basis just by being. This level, and he was different than other generals in a lot of ways anyway. He was one of those ones they couldn't get rid of because he's the guy that wins wars. Right?
So he was
the
a
way he
PC.
thought.
He was a PC.
He was
Definitely not an
silent
NPC.
But he was a guy that wins wars. You know? Boy, to think of him, I get chills because he insisted on me being his driver whenever he came to play that ball. Yeah, absolutely. That's my driver there, and I never understood why, but other people apparently do now. I don't want to sound boastful.
Oh yeah, that would be not humble of you.
Yeah. It's funny because we'll talk about humility on another show, I'm sure. But
I'm sure
I
it'd
do
be a
consider
good
myself
magical
actually
topic.
humble, but I consider myself honestly humble to the point where I can joke about humility. The last thing that I go through on that list, does all of this contemplation and activity allow us to think with the simulation if we as individuals can keep our frame rate up, right? We need to be able to keep our frame rate up in order to keep functioning while the system is stumbling around us. That's one thing that I brought up, that I thought about. What do we have to do, and does magic allow us to keep that frame rate? Does it allow?
I think so.
I think so. I think it's part of the meditative practice, the self-enhancement we gain through that, and I think that allows us, after thinking about that question a bit, to actually maintain our status while other things around us are stumbling.
Right.
While the universe around us is starting to jerk in motion, while it's trying to catch up with what we've done,
we're picking everybody off.
Yeah. We're able to
if it's a first-person shooter.
I used to play Second Life, and I cheated. Okay? So there was a combat sim I hung out on. I created this device. I created a device with 100 flashers in it. So it flashed, but it flashed no light. It just did the function of flashing light. And I put it inside my chest, and whenever a fight was coming up, I would start that sucker up. And everybody around me would be all of a sudden staggering. But I could turn it on and off because their frame rates would drop. I would then be able to pick them off with ease. Is that something we do with magic? Is the basic question. I'm not necessarily talking about picking people off, but using that level of skill, technology, knowledge to freeze things around us so that we can manipulate them. Is that part of how we're working the simulation? Interjecting our will into the code.
I mean, it would have to be, right? Everybody is inundated with programming from all over, whether that's a biological programming, right? Our needs need to be fulfilled. The practice of magic is supposed to develop the will, not only the will of the individual unit, but the divine will attached to it, right? So that, there's the will, then there's the divine will, right? Part of the praxis, or the symptoms of praxis, is that your own individual will becomes empowered. It does, right? But it is subjugated by a divine will, right? It's run by that upper program, right? If you're doing things in the appropriate order, as has been passed down for, a long, long time. I'm not going to get into dates or details. The idea is that we have an individual self and a connection to a much larger unit of self. And each one of us has a form for some reason or another, something that we're supposed to get to. So part of the nice thing about the magical reality is we get to define that to some degree. I think the more you stretch outside of the wheelhouse you're supposed to be in, you know, it's not me competing against like God as an individual unit, right? I think people get really mixed up with that, right? If there's a divine will, then that must mean somebody's fucking with my free will.
Yeah, baby.
Maybe. And that really irritates people. It really gets under their skin. They don't like that. I found in my own experience that surrendering to that in some way, or at least acknowledging that there's a better path for me to follow, reduces my suffering greatly.
Right.
I'm still going to have pain, but the suffering that I incur dramatically reduces. Now, there's still wiggle room within there, right? And now I might suffer a little bit by taking off this way and saying, well, my will wants this today, you know, and I might generate some of that for myself. But I think to answer your question, the practice generates a willpower or a container that becomes somewhat impervious to the other desires, the more base desires, the base programming that might infiltrate somebody who isn't practicing. If you're not meditating on a regular basis, you are much more likely to be influenced by emotive people who are like emoting around you. You are going to take on their energy very fast. You're going to be frustrated by it. You're not going to like it. But if you are in that practice, you are much more stable, right? If somebody comes at you, you can bend past them, right? You can throw an Aikido move of the mind on them and say, you know what, I'm not going to be affected by that. That's yours, that's not mine. So I think there is definitely a way that we rise above certain base programs that when we are vested in our praxis, right? When we are vested. If we drop out of it and we don't do it, and it's the same for me, like dailies, I'm not as strict about them as I probably should be because of how my ritual pattern tends to be. I'll go on like these 60-day benders where I get really attuned, and then I have to drop off for a little bit from like heavy lifting. I still keep little things in. Meditation, writing is part of my spiritual praxis. Reading is part of that praxis. If I don't do those things, then I'm not, that's upkeep, right? There's upkeep, and then there's the stuff that's the big bangers that help you elevate the code a little bit more, help you rise above your previous programming and maybe reshape what your program looks like. There's the basics, though. If you don't do the basics, you are going to remain in the same code level as the NPCs, right?
Very hard to ascend out of it. It's very hard to do that.
But it should be a mix of the daily stuff and the big stuff. You can't go all big stuff, and you can't just do dailies.
No, well, the problem if you just do the big stuff.
If your goal is to ascend to a higher code level.
The dailies are like a fuel for the big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They work like a fuel. That's the thing that gives you the ability to get into state. When you don't do your dailies at all, I'm not saying you got to do them every day. No, I'm an everyday guy, right? I do dailies,
and everybody's different, right?
But not everybody needs to do what I do. They need to find what works for them, the pattern that works for them. And if you do that and you find the pattern that works, you're going to feel that harmonic happen. And all of a sudden, the bigger thing is going to be a lot easier. You're going to have the energy. People that are tired all the time, I don't get it. I don't know why you're tired. Why are you not fixing that? You know, that is a suffering state. That is not a health state. That is not a pleasant state. Get your meditation going. 5 minutes of meditation in the morning, 5 minutes of meditation in the evening. You will feel better. All you got to do is count your breath.
I think any magical regimen, right? If you are approaching that from a state of suffering, where you're, even if you're like trying to get out, right? I'm trying to get out of suffering, so I'm turning to magic. And we see this happen a lot, right? A lot of people who are in deep states of suffering turn to magic because it's the last recourse, right? Or it's like they're like, I got to do something, but they bring that suffering with them, right? And hopefully through time, working some of these practices, that starts to fade away. But if you cling to that and you bring it in, those rituals are not going to be kind to you.
Well,
They're
and
not.
then if you bring your misery with you, you're still that peasant in Warcraft. Stop touching me! I don't know if that many people don't know the reference I'm talking about, but in the original game, you could keep poking the peasants until they got irritated with you.
I forgot about that.
I have a
I forgot
computer.
about
That's
that.
its only job is to play Warcraft. That's it.
Oh, talk about a simulation in a simulation right
Yeah.
there. And we do that even online, right? Our online personas, that's a different simulation. Our magical personas, different simulation within the simulation, right?
Well, and
It's
I maintain different personas intentionally, right?
Mhm.
So I have 3 different magical personas that I affect, 3 different titles I work under
Mhm.
intentionally, right? Um, I have my core self. I have my ritual self where I function as a confessor, and I have
Mhm.
my ritual self where I practice with other people,
Mhm.
right? And very rarely people encounter the real me, right? The core me. And in general, you won't find that guy online, right?
Mhm.
And I've learned this because there are times when your persona becomes untenable. And you take those parts, you bundle them up, and you get rid of them. Because if you know my philosophy, if it's not making you stronger, rip it out.
Address it in some way,
Yeah.
at the very least.
Well, and some things you can retrain, some things you can rip it out. Really is a rough way to put it, but
No,
you
I
need.
know what you mean. I know what you mean by it, but some people may not, right? You
Yeah.
know, surgical removal of certain parts of self, I think, is a last recourse. I've definitely performed that on
Mm-hmm.
myself. There are certain aspects that I've removed. Um,
And it hurts.
However, more often than not, that was a last resort after trying to integrate it or trying to work with it or trying to understand what that experience was so that I could better use it. Because I think that, especially in the magical worldview, the one that we're operating under, our vices, our weaknesses, are portals to our greatest strengths.
Yes.
They're not something to be asceticized and cut out of ourselves and shoved into a corner. If you have a vice, if you have a weakness, lean into that because there's something hiding there, or you're hiding from something in that that could be very powerful to your praxis. Definitely need to consider what that weakness is, why it's there.
I spent a long time doing it before I exercised that. But like you, eventually it came time to decide it's time to get rid of this.
Yeah, and that's at a totally personal level, right? Like you have
Right.
to decide that.
Right.
Ooh, well, I think that's a good place for us to stop.
Wow.
We
That
gave
was,
we gave them a lot there.
I think so. Hope you all appreciate it. He puts a lot of thought into this stuff. I just kind of hang out. This is a lot of fun though. I hope people are learning things from our experience. I'm not doing that as a boastful way, like I know everything. I don't. But we question this. We both talk about this stuff, and I want everybody to understand that the goal is to talk about it, and maybe y'all talk about it. Talk about it with us. I mean, you can go on the page on to Eslath Quest. You can go there and meet us there. Ask us questions. That's a great place to go. It's there's no data stored, right? There's no data stored. Frater set this up so that you can go there, be yourself, and be free of observation and judgment, unless you're stupid. If you're stupid,
That's true.
we're gonna laugh at you.
Yeah. Find your tribe, right? Find your
Yeah.
tribe, and that's the whole reason I do it too. All other than the fact that also these conversations, this this format, this is what the old guys used to do. This is what Plato was up to, right?
Yeah.
This is what the old boys were up to. You get a couple of people together to discuss a topic, and in the process of asking each other questions and elucidating what it is that I have, to say about that, Maybe you gain something. I know I gained something from the question and from my own statement. I go, oh, maybe that's not necessarily true, even though I said it. In the moment it comes up, I'm like, that's not necessarily true, is it? Okay, well, I need to go back and analyze what that is. But the conversation has to happen, right? And a conversation is built of questions and answers, not statements and statements.
Right.
And that's the key to really rebuilding, I think, a reality is questions and answers, and questions that generate more questions rather than statements, blind statements that don't want to have any interference from the other side. If I'm operating from a perception where I do not want to be infected whatsoever by anything you have to say, then I am cutting myself out of reality, and I'm living in a self-contained echo chamber that really limits my ability to do anything in life, whether magical or mundane. It's severely limiting, and there's a really cool book that I'm reading right now called Technic and Magic, and it's this I forget, I think he's Portuguese. I could be wrong on that, but he's a philosopher, and he's talking about in the book that we have developed into a worldview of technic, which goes back to what I was talking about. Everything's production units, and there's no meaning assigned to anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we used to be in a magical worldview where everything that we agreed upon was a designed meaning, something that we all came together and did. And where he's going within the book, I haven't finished it yet, so I can't really speak to it much. But the bend of it seems to be like, we need to move away from this technic, reductive, material worldview to something that's more meaning based and magical. And I think that the way we get there is through asking questions, like Socrates did. Like, ask questions of yourself, of your peers, of the world, of the spirits, whatever it is. Ask questions, make less statements, listen more, talk less.
So,
Mic drop.
boom.